I watched Trump's speech on the USS George Washington in Japan today, so you don't have to, and here's my overview. Today I won't start with the craziest thing he said, I'll start with the most honest thing he said, which is that October 2024 feels like 10 years ago, and I wrote in my notes, ain't that right? I don't know how he does it every time, including this speech, but he ended up talking for an hour. In that hour, he mentioned Biden on 2 separate occasions, and then he called the soldiers good-looking guys on 6 different occasions. Since he wants the Nobel Peace Prize so bad, he figured he'd better start off with some peaceful things. So he says, we're going to go in and blast the hell out of the countries, but it's better if you don't go in. And then he says, no one makes weapons like us, but if we do, we will crush them to oblivion. And then he says, I should get the Nobel Prize Award, but that statement takes me out of the running. And just so we're clear, he calls it the Nobel Peace Award because he does not understand that there are Nobel laureates in multiple different fields every single year. He's talking about the generals and the upper officers on this ship, and he says, these people could walk onto Wall Street and make a fortune. He does not explain any of that or show how it's relevant in any way. He says to boisterous cheer that he's going to increase the Department of Defense budget to over $1 trillion, which makes sense because he's ending every war around the world, and as the president of peace, he's not going to get us involved in any more wars. So we're going to take the highest funded department from $887 billion to over $1 trillion. Makes sense. Oh yeah, because he mentioned how good looking these soldiers are again on 6 different occasions, I'm going to give you a direct quote of his. I don't like good looking people, I'll be honest with you, I've never admitted that before. He goes on this long rant about how everything in the US is now based on merit because he won some Supreme Court case based on merit, but that before he won that Supreme Court case, basically anyone could get any job for any reason. Now, mind you, he's saying that in front of a bunch of military members who he's claiming that they got their position based on merit, when all of them, because they were in Japan and deployed on this ship in international waters before he gave this speech, all of them had been in the military before it was based on merit, so nothing about them being able to join the military has anything to do with that. But he does say, I look at you and I see nothing but merit. Okay. Even though he had to take a $130 million donation from a wealthy donor in order to pay the military, which I pointed out just hours after that speech would equal approximately $100 per service member, I'm glad some news outlets did finally pick up on that. He says that he's going to give a raise to every member of the military. Now, mind you, he's saying that he's going to give the raise, that he's going to increase the budget for the DoD to over $1 trillion while they're unable to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open. He's just bragging about all the additional money that he's going to spend because all he's ever done is spend money. After he just verbally offers everyone a pay raise, he says, if you don't want a pay raise and want to give it to your country, we can do that. And then asks, does anyone want to do that? And everyone's like, no. He says for the DoD, they've never spent so much money and they've also never spent it so wisely. And then the explanation he gives for how they know that they're spending it wisely, he says, because we're actually watching it now. This was really weird, but he says, I don't feel like your boss, but I guess I am. And then he says, I always wanted to be an admiral. I love the uniforms. And then he references the fact that they were out to sea and they were getting additional pay for the fact that they were out to sea at the time when he made the announcement that he was going to make this speech. And then they had to come back in. And then because they had to come back in, they weren't getting paid as much as they were when they were on a mission out to sea. And so he says that he's going to get them that additional pay that they were supposed to have had because he forced them back. So now he's going to give them that additional pay because they had to come back because he decided to give a speech at the last minute. Again, saving American taxpayers a hell of a lot of money here. Here's a direct quote. The USS George Washington doesn't feel like a ship. It's solid. This is a solid piece of stuff. He says, of course, that he solved 8 wars in 8 months. It's actually 0 wars in 9 months. And then he calls all of the soldiers who were there aggressive because they wanted to take their picture with him. I'm going to do my best to describe this section because it was a very long, very weird rant, but he's talking about the catapults that launched the aircraft off of the aircraft carrier, and is talking about how they used to be steam powered and now they're electric, and then says that he's going to put in an order specifically to change them back to steam powered instead of electric. And then he says they changed it for the sake of changing it. And then he goes on this weird rant talking about how the elevators on the ships used to be hydraulics, but now they're magnets. And he says, quote, if you drop water on magnets, you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what this man's obsession is with magnets. And then he asks some random guy, he says, do you agree that we have steam for catapults and hydraulics for elevators? And then he says, I'm going to put in an order. Seriously. He says throughout this rant like 5 times, I'm being serious, guys. Like, you need to answer this question. Do you want steam powered or do you want electric? Do you want hydraulic or do you want magnets? I'm being serious. I swear to God, he did that like at least 5 times. And then he says that that whole process that he went through there, just kind of call and response, asking the crowd whether or not they should have steam or electric or hydraulic or magnets. He says that instead of paying contractors billions of dollars to figure this out, he's just going to go what they say, and then he's going to put in the orders to have that done. God, this man understands nothing about how the U.S. military works. I swear to God, not a single thing. But again, direct quote, if you drop water on magnets, you don't know what's going to happen. Let's do a little experiment and see if we can't save little Donnie a couple $1 billion. Magnet. Water. Okay, nothing happens. That's too bad. I mean, God, what an idiot. He makes a claim that Biden claimed that he used to be a pilot. I just looked that up. Has he ever claimed that? And there are already multiple fact check pages out showing that Biden has never once in his career claimed to be a pilot or claimed to be in the military. Weird how that works. This next thought he separates out because in the beginning of the speech, and I skipped this in my notes, he says, we have the hottest country in the world, and a year ago we had a different country. And then later in the speech, at this point that I'm now talking about, he says a year ago we were a dead country. So he says the same thing that he said in all of them, except for he says it differently over the course of like 45 minutes. He says again, $17 trillion has been brought in only 8 months, and then makes a claim multiple times that that number will for sure be either 20 or 21 trillion by the end of the year. Oh yeah, and then he says that Toyota is going to be building tens of billions of dollars worth of plants in the US, and he says specifically, go out and buy a Toyota. I guess with Donald Trump president, every month is Toyota-thon. He says, of course, that for 5 months now, no one has come into the country illegally, but of course he says he does not believe that, which makes sense because it's a statistical impossibility. He also says that we're taking in trillions and trillions of dollars in tariffs, so your money, and then he says without tariffs, we don't have national security. I guess. I'm going to remind you now that he said last week and the week before that and the week before that and the week before that 300,000 people a year die from drug overdoses in this country. But today he says that number is 200,000. And then he says that 25 million people came into the country illegally and that 11,388 of them were murderers. He has in the past said 11,588, 11,488. And in fact, last week he said 11,458. He is just all over the place because, again, everything's just made up. He says regarding cities that people don't care if you send in the military or the National Guard or the Space Command, they just want safe cities. I'm going to let you know the protests in these cities show very clearly that people do mind. He also says, we are not going to have people killed in our cities whether or not you like it. He says that every vessel that they illegally blow up in the Caribbean saves 25,000 American lives. And then he's talking about the submarine that they blew up. And he says, and this might be a first for him, you know more about submarines than I do, which is odd because he usually says, no one knows more about submarines than I do. I wish I was making this one up. I honestly do. He reiterates again for the third or fourth time this month that no president that we know of has ever ended a war. He literally does not know American history. He finally gives a list of the wars he ended. You want to hear it? Kosovo, Serbia. As far as I know, that war ended in like 98, 99. Congo and Rwanda. That war's been going on for like 35 years and he has done nothing to end it. Pakistan and India, they've been fighting over the Kashmir region for decades. Israel and Iran, they're still bombing each other, so not quite sure what he's talking about there. Egypt and Ethiopia, that was not a war that was going on at any time that he was president. Armenia and Azerbaijan, he tells some weird story about the leaders of those two countries being on opposite sides of the Oval Office when he meets with them, and then by the end they're hugging, but I don't think he ended any wars. He claims the war in Gaza is over, even though Israel continues to bomb Palestinians. Cambodia and Thailand, which he claims he just ended yesterday when he signed the thing in Malaysia, and says that was a war that was just starting. If you are on my Patreon, you know I talked about this. That war started escalating in May and then really escalated in July when armed forces started conflicting, and he says that he did all of that verbally. He says that energy, gas, and groceries are all way down, and here's a direct quote, everyone in our country is now doing well. He brags about some soldier who works for the deck department on this aircraft carrier, and then he says he has no idea what a deck department does. He then attributes the quote, first in war, first in peace, to George Washington. It was actually said by Henry Lee at George Washington's funeral, and the full quote is, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. And then he says, first in war, first in peace, first in wealth, first in power, first in science, first in spirit, and first in freedom. And then he says we have 92% of the frontage of the Gulf of America. Before we hit 10 minutes, I have to thank a couple people. This person says, enjoy your gift. I really enjoy your content. Thank you for everything you do. From Carol, they sent me a standing desk. Carol, it is set up and I love it so much, and now it was incredibly generous of you. And this person says, thank you for the recaps. Make sure you take time for yourself and step away if you need to. Hugs from Amy, and they sent me a gift card. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you for the gifts. I really do appreciate it. 10 minutes.